أشكر لكم حضوركم في هذا الصباح اليوم في فن أبو ظبي، وفي مناسبتنا الأولى في الخليج معهد مسك للفنون. في الحقيقة الجميل أنه هذه المناسبة في حديقة في هذا المكان الجميل. وإحنا عندما بدأنا فكرة معهد مسك للفنون بدأنا بفكرة أنه بناء أي مؤسسة ثقافية مثل الحديقة بالضبط، تبدأ ببناء الحديقة أو كيف تنشئ حديقة. فأهلا بكم جميعا. Welcome everybody to this intimate gathering. I would like to thank Abu Dhabi Art Fair for hosting us and the amazing panelists from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, Beirut, from Kuwait, from Los Angeles. So thank you, and also thank you for your time with us. This is actually a very special moment for me personally, because it's the first event in the Gulf by Misk Art Institute, and we chose to, start with an intimate gathering. That's how I feel it's more connect people to each other. And also, when we start with the first idea of Misk Art Institute, we start with the idea of how to build an attractive garden. This is why it's in the garden today. So to build a museum is exactly like to build a garden. So you watch, you change, you put the things, you come back and you watch. So this is, I think, the best metaphor for being here today to talk about an institution.
Thank you to Abu Dhabi Art and to the Misk Art Institute for putting this panel together and for inviting me to moderate this really wonderful panel this morning. My name is Al-Nakib. I am an associate professor of history at the American University of Kuwait. So I'm a little bit of an imposter here. I'm not in the arts world, but I'm an urban historian from Kuwait. And so I'll be moderating the panel this morning entitled In the Open, Art, Communities, and Public Space. And the purpose of this panel is to explore the relationship between art, communities, and public space. So the main issue we'll be tackling here is the role of art and the artist in transforming both public space and the communities that surround and use those spaces. Or said another way, we aim to examine how art affects people, who we loosely term the public, when it emerges out of the four walls of the gallery or museum and into the public realm of the city or the town, and thus becomes that elusively termed public art. How does public art impact the community that exists around it, the community for whom it seemingly exists? So to begin this discussion, we need to just briefly discuss or address what public art is. Generally speaking, there are two main kinds of public art: the commemorative, so monuments, statues, memorials meant to document aspects of a city's or a nation's history, and the decorative, sculptures, installations, murals, produced largely by commissioned artists. Now, of course, there's much overlap between these two types, particularly today, but they can also be quite different. So sometimes purely commemorative public art is not always imaginative enough to suit the tastes of the art critic, while decorative public art is sometimes too imaginative for public tastes. But in both instances, public art is hardly ever spontaneous. No matter the purpose of or the artist, public art always requires planning, commissioning, permits, careful selection by municipalities and committees. Despite its designation, public art does not and cannot please everyone. And the public certainly has rights to engage in their own debates, whether it be about Richard Serra's Tilted Arc in Manhattan's Federal Plaza, or Katharina Fritzsch's bright blue cockerel on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square in London, or about the kitschy monuments of Arabic coffee pots and miniature clock towers that adorn Kuwait's and other Gulf cities' roundabouts. What really makes such art public is the space it occupies. Again, it's not in a gallery or a museum, but rather sits somewhere out in the open, in what we loosely refer to as public space. There's a feeling of democratization in the term, art that is there for everyone to see and enjoy for free. But since its inception in ancient times, public art has always been closely tied to the interests of the state, whether it's created to memorialize great men and their battles, or has been commissioned by state or municipal governments to elevate the status of their city by adorning it with artistic masterpieces. Public art is also expensive and can eat up valuable public resources. Their need for display and preservation can result in strict rules governing the use of the surrounding area, chipping away at the public nature of the space in which it sits. Where then does the public actually come in public art? Is the purpose of public art to beautify the city or to bring art to the masses? And if the latter, is there or should there be a difference between public art and private art? Can artists transform not only the landscape their work adorns, but also the community their work penetrates? So to begin addressing some of these questions, the panelists here with us today will share not only their perspectives, but also stories of their own struggles and experiences in connecting artists with the people and the spaces that surround them. So I'm going to begin with you, Flavin Judd, and if I can ask each of you just at the very beginning, if you can just briefly introduce yourself. But when we talk about public, art out in the open and art, the capacity for art to really impact the community in which it exists, I thought it would make sense to begin with you. If you could speak to us a little bit about the work of your father, Donald Judd, in Marfa, and some of these kinds of issues about public and private art.
My father was an artist, and as an artist, at the beginning he was only interested in his work. And he had a little loft on 19th Street in New York. And that's kind of where it began. In 1968, my parents bought a building on the corner of Spring and Mercer in New York, which is a 5-story building. And so things started to grow from there. And later, when he died in 94, I was 25 years old. And I knew that he wanted all of his buildings, the building in New York and some buildings in Texas, preserved as a foundation, so it became public by accident. Don felt that all artwork was good, was worth preserving, and therefore he liked his artwork, therefore it was worth preserving. Don's work is about logic, and so it's consistent. So when he died, myself and my younger sister were tasked with building his foundation, which had no money, and it was in fact in debt. And while we knew his wishes, we were not given any roadmap of how to accomplish this. And naturally, most people said, well, you can't do that. It's not going to work. You can't keep the building in New York. It's too expensive. You have to restore it. It's from 1870. It's falling apart. Well, there's too many buildings in Marfa. You can't keep the ranches. You can't do this. You can't do that. But we felt that if somebody is entrusting you with a task, you have to at least try. And so while I naively thought it would only take 5 to 10 years, and we're still doing it 23 years later, it's certainly been worth it. These images that you see on the screen are a series of images of the spaces, and they'll just simply rotate. And so when he was growing up, his parents moved around a lot, and so the consistent thing was his grandparents' farm, which is in Missouri, and every summer he would go back and spend time at this farm. And later, when he moved to New York to study philosophy and painting, he admired the art of the abstract expressionists like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko and these people, but he knew that to make his own art, it had to be something else other than the art that he liked. Because if you just make the art of the people you like, you're just a second-rate Rothko, which doesn't help anybody. So he spent a long time as an art critic, which kind of informed him about what was going on, what other people were doing. And his art slowly evolved from kind of abstract paintings, representational abstract paintings, to linear abstract paintings, to the later work, which is three-dimensional, sitting on the floor and on the walls. And slowly, as his work developed, it became about space itself. And so we bought this building in New York. He filled that up with art and space, empty space, and basically decided it was finished. And then in 1971, we started going to Baja California, which is in the north of Mexico, because Don wanted a landscape that he liked, and he didn't like trees, so Baja California was absolutely perfect. There are no trees. And it was beautiful. I mean, he was designing houses for Mexico, and he loved it. It was on the ocean. But the politics got in the way. You couldn't bring art in or out, and it became impossible. So he found Marfa, and it started out as a small house for the summer, and that it grew from there. And what started out as this small rental house just to put his paintings and his older work became a 20-building, 3-ranch foundation in Marfa. So it's public by accident, and it's also big by accident. Don needed space for his artwork, but of course he kept finding nice buildings and buying them, so the things grow. And what Don was doing with his artwork was that for him it had to be about itself. It had to be not referential to anything. It simply was art like rocks or the natural world. So in a certain sense, Don's work is very empirical and very logical. And everything springs from there. So everything that informs the work comes from the way it is made and a kind of simplicity of design. And through the developments in Marfa and the buildings that we bought, I don't know where we are now, but through that, the requirement came for furniture and architecture, and so he had an architecture practice that came out of the necessities of living in a place with no architects and no furniture. So he started designing his own furniture, and he restored his buildings, and all of this, while the architecture and the design was separate from the art, it's all related because it all has the same integrity and the same desires. So he came to Marfa for the landscape, and he slowly bought the houses, including the ranch houses, while at the same time having shows all over the world. And for him, the artwork that was out in the world, like in the galleries and the museums, was an unhappy arrangement, because for him, he felt that the artwork was better, that it was placed correctly once and left alone. So Marfa was an example, to be an example of that. And while there are some public artworks in Germany, in Europe, for Don, there was no separation between an artwork that is in the public and an artwork that is, for instance, in the studio. It just happens to be in a different place. So while there are considerations of where an artwork is placed and the surrounding environment, the status of being public is unimportant. And after Marfa became developed, because we bought a lot of the houses in the late 70s and the 80s, that also started architectural projects in Europe and studios in Europe, because even though Marfa's great and that's where we spent most of our time, sometimes you want a really good coffee, and so a studio in Europe is a good way to do that. And in this way, Don basically started with an idea for art about how it would not be. He admired Yves Klein and Rothko and Pollock and all these people, but he felt that, as I mentioned, it was important to do your own artwork, because otherwise you're just doing somebody else's artwork in a bad way. So basically, from having wanting a small house in a little town, he created, through his art and his architecture and his furniture, basically changed the culture that he was in. And I think that's basically what artists do. They change the culture by making their own culture within their culture. And the foundation is basically around to keep it going. We restored the building in New York, which is a huge project. We're restoring the buildings in Texas now. We have shows. We have a show at MoMA in New York in 2020. We just published the complete writings of Don. We have other books. So yeah, what slide are we on? Okay, and then all of that together is basically preserving one person's life, because if somebody does something and it's good enough, it's worth preserving.
So I'm George Richards. I'm head of heritage programs at Jemil, and I'm based in Jeddah. And I thought I'd take us back to the very beginning, as it were, to what could be termed the origins of public art in Arabia, and starting to think about the spectacular petroglyphs and rock carvings and other public exhibitions of art that you can find all over the Arabian Peninsula, whether that's high up in Al-Ula in northern Saudi Arabia, Madain Saleh as well, fantastic examples of rock carvings, or down south on the Yemen border at El Khudud in Najran. And rock carvings are driven in anthropological terms and archaeological terms by the same motivations that compelled people in Europe at an earlier stage to execute the wonderful cave paintings that we know from Lascaux and Chauvet and other famous sites, as a way of expressing themselves primarily, and to Dr. Farah's point, also to combine commemorative and decorative forms of public art. On the next slide, we can see an example from what's called Ikma, and known colloquially as the Library of the Lihyan, who were, and the Lihyan or Lihyanites were a pre-Islamic Arabian kingdom in northern Saudi Arabia. And hidden away in a sandstone gorge, there's a spectacular wall covered from floor to top with rock carvings that transport you across time as well as space. They have different languages and different alphabets that had their various flourishings over history. There are also decorative pieces, mythological beasts that combine human bodies with those of animals. And we can see the range of expression. So it wasn't just commemorative, it was also decorative. And on the next slide, we can see on the left is a palm tree with what looks to me like a monkey running up the side of the trunk. And this is probably at least 2,000, probably 3,000 years old, very difficult to date petroglyphs. And on the right is something very unusual. And this is up in Al-Ula, which is iron oxide paintings. And on the left-hand side, you can see hands. And this was probably executed by hollowing out a stick and then spitting a reddish paint, pestle and mortared from iron oxide. And then on the right-hand side, dancing figures, obviously commemorating some kind of ritual. So what does this all mean in terms of public art? Well, the first point I would say is that these photographs don't do it justice. To understand these, I think it's a very experiential form of art. You have to be camping out in the deserts as the sun rises, drinking Arabic coffee, and then seeing the warm light slowly spread across a rock face and pick out these beautiful rock carvings. And then you're transported into the language and the iconography of the people who executed these pictures, whether rock carvings or paintings. As I said, there's a sense of dialogue. They're provoking discussion. They're pictures that weren't or were rarely seen in the natural lives of these people. They also speak across time. So at the Library of the Lihyan I showed earlier, they are talking across centuries of human inhabitation of that site, almost in dialogue with people long gone before them. And there is definitely a feeling that the great civilizations, for example, in northern Arabia, the Didan, the Lihyan, and the Nabateans, who are to some degree largely forgotten or little known today, are preserved through their artistic representation. And this commemorative function, whether deliberate or accidental, is an important product of this early example of public art. And so with a slightly clunky jump, we can move forward to a more recent history of Arabia, in Jeddah in particular. And so in the 70s and 80s, Jeddah as a city was expanding rapidly from its historical historical town, Al-Balad, which is now in the south of the city, the ancient port, and it spread northwards in an explosion of construction. And the inspirational and visionary mayor of the city in the 70s and 80s, Dr. Mohammed Farsi, thought that this... he thought that this new city needed to be beautified. And so he set about importing and commissioning around 600 sculptures in collaboration with the architect and sculptor and artist Julio Lafuente to decorate the city. And in doing so, he obviously provoked debate. The types of sculptures that he imported ranged hugely. There were European pieces by Henry Moore, by Miro, by Pomodoro, pieces from Arab artists, Shafiq Mazloum, Hisham bin Jabi. And all of these were dotted around the city, on the avenues, on the new roundabouts, in public spaces. And it was undoubtedly a great triumph for the city. If there was a theme, it was probably something to do with the sea and Jeddah's relationship with its maritime trading past. And a lot of the pieces also have a sort of geometric, abstract feel to them. And while they decorated the city for many years, of course, the rather severe climate of Jeddah took its toll. And whether it was a question of the extreme heat, or the dust and sand, or the salt from the sea air, or very high humidity, a lot of these pieces, over time, began to degrade slightly. Many of them were made from steel or bronze. And so in about 2012, the Jeddah municipality and Art Jamil set about a project to restore and to rehouse a number of the sculptures in an open-air sculpture museum. Next slide, please. The restoration firm of Plowden Smith was commissioned to bring back to the former grandeur some of these wonderful pieces. Here's a Henry Moore bronze, and a sort of patina that had been scarred by dust and sand in the air was slowly removed, and a sort of veneer varnish was put on top to give it its original exuberance. Next slide. And here, these are two wonderful pieces. In the foreground is a Karina untitled work, and in the back is a Miro called Project for a Monument. These are in the current open-air sculpture museum, which is located on the Corniche. Next slide, please. Here's another Cube 4 by Pomodoro, and this is post-restoration. And the next slide actually shows you, that was during restoration, this is after restoration, now installed in the park, open-air sculpture museum. And I think the point about the open-air sculpture museum is, if you can sort of tie these two themes together, is that Dr. Mohammed Farsi saw an opportunity to provoke dialogue and to connect the people of Jeddah with the wider world and with the past, because cube number 4 here is a piece that was made in the 1920s. Here's a Henry Moore oval with points. Some of these pieces were much older than the kind of growth of Jeddah. There's also a point, I think, that he saw that the function, the experiential aspect of sculpture and public art. And this is continued in the open-air sculpture museum today. So, as you can see in the background, these pieces have open seating areas. There's a bit of grass where people can bring their families and picnic, and they find themselves drawn to these works of art, just as perhaps the ancient peoples of northern Arabia were once drawn to those sites that were covered in rock carvings and iron oxide paintings. And I will hand shortly to Ahmad, who was instrumental in recording the process and documenting, photographing the sculptures as the restoration and relocation of some of the pieces was undertaken. Thank you.
Maatar, artist, and also I'm running a MISC Art Institution. I would love to talk as an artist now, so yeah, less responsibility, so and more, yeah. So yes, the question usually for me as an artist, let's ask ourselves, what's make our city attractive? If we ask ourselves, like there is a lot of innovation and invention in our time for technology, for cars, phones, all of these things. But did we hear about a fantastic city or attractive city in our time? Usually the city is not going on the right move, like to accommodate us or attract us. So usually the attractive cities is either to be old or city that we ask ourselves, I want to visit Paris, I want to visit this plaza, or I want to visit this place. So I think this is a very important question. And from this, we ask ourselves what's make it attractive, and public space is one of answer is public space. And I called it usually semi-public space because I would love the idea where is the, I feel the public space is a connection of my home. So it's like we are in connection with the home. So it's very interesting and very smart when you say public space. So it's not only about monument, it's about the space itself. How can we make a public space very interesting? Then I think the idea is I just want to see the face of the people. So it's not big, it's not small at the same time. I want to see people in this place. I want to see, so it's not only about to build a square. So it's not about square anymore. It's about people themselves. So from this, I started to documenting like 3 or 4 places in Saudi Arabia. One of them is Al-Muftaha Art Village. Al-Muftaha Art Village, I start from Abha, from the south. Yeah, so from Al-Muftaha, yeah, this is it clear, the picture? Yeah, from here it's clear, from my side, I cannot see it. So Al-Muftaha is, is a place that built for the artist. It's like the place that I start building inside, and they have like a nice modern, but inspired by the a studio for artists, a place where people can see each other and gather. Also, it's full of old heritage color that in Asir, which is called Al-Qat. So that's Al-Muftaha is one of the example in south of Saudi Arabia that show how it's going. This is all talk, and in this talk you can see Dr. Abdul Halim al-Radawi, one of the pioneers, Ahmad Baqir from Bahrain, and from Oman, from Yemen, the artist. So everyone was coming there just to do kind of this very casual talk. So this is very important also. So it was the center, the place where everyone see each other. After that, this is our old opening also in Al-Muftaha. So here is an old studio. You can see me with some of X-rays from us, and Stephen in the left side. Yeah. So we start with this old, when we start in Abha, we call ourselves Shatta group. Shatta is mean different. We are a group, but we don't like each other. Everyone has an idea. So we do, was our proposal to build our Shatta. It's like a hollowed sign in Abha because Abha has a green. So we think about something like this. So this was an idea. Then after that, I moved to Jeddah. And I moved to Jeddah to do to document the I called it the expansion of Mecca city, which was very at the core of my projects. But in the same time, I opened a small studio called Faran Studio. Faran is like the oldest name of Mecca and the wilderness around Hijaz. This studio is a small space that work like we called it a cultural mining project. So in this studio, start the idea of documenting the sculpture and we start to know about everything in Jeddah. So if we can come back to sculpture. Then, yeah, here is the when the some photos not in the to publish first time. So this is when they move one in the street. I was following all of the cars. Yeah. So here is the space and by the sea of the garden, one of the gardens. Here documenting Miru sculpture. Yeah, yeah. Here is a beautiful photo for me. It's like Superman. This is when I start with the Miru Superman. Yeah, here's an old photo with Muhammad Said Farsi, and they when at the same place with the same of renovation. This is one of the pieces when it's arrived to Jeddah first time. So this is from the archive of the family Farsi. Yes. Yeah. So for me, this was one of the things that give me an order or to think about the orders of these places and the variety in the same time. After that, the chance come to build something more and more real, which is the Misk Art Institute. So I want to, and after all of this time recording, documenting, and work as an artist, meet a lot of artists, trying to create a platform and change from, like we build like Shatta, then Edge of Arabia, then many platforms that we create during this time. So the result after all of this was like, what is Misk Art Institute that I'm now working with? It's a grassroots organization. I believe in grassroots organization, and this is my proposal to Misk Art Institute. So if we could build a grassroots project that connect people, and in the same time that have this, it's global connection, then I find it. This is the only way that I can work with. And like when I start with the idea of garden, the museum, institution, public space is really like a garden. So when we think about how to build a garden, then we think about how to build everything else. So this is like just a summary of 3 places in Saudi Arabia, and thank you.
Art in the public space and all of those kinds of, and the commissions and the platforms and so on that have been created. But I wonder if all 3 of you would be able to comment then on, because Ahmed, you mentioned, for instance, one of the things that appeals to you as an artist is you want to be able to see the faces of the people. So what then is the impact on the communities? Is that mine that's doing? I don't know. What impact does all this have on the communities that are at stake? And I don't necessarily mean the artistic communities, but like, for instance, in Marfa in Texas, yes, I think the transformation that happened with Don's work has definitely created a space for the artistic community in his wake and their attraction to the place. But what about the community of Marfa, the people of the town? What kind of effect has that had? Same in Jeddah, you mentioned, George, that people are attracted to these monuments for picnics and things. But so I'm wondering then, what kind of effect and impact do all of these projects or in platforms and so on have on the public communities in which they are created or emerge? And I guess I'll just sort of maybe pass it down, or however you guys want to jump in.
That was a big question. Let me see if I can put it together. I very much like Ahmed's term of wanting to see the faces of the people, and that you start with a garden. I think it is actually slightly related, because in Marfa, when we moved there, was a dying town. The cattle industry had been going downhill, and its prospects for existing were actually not looking very good. And there were no artists there when we moved there. There was Border Patrol, there were cowboys and workers. Now there's a huge artistic community, and basically the art saved the town, because there is no other industry in Marfa. People don't make things. There are some stores now, but they all rotate around the art that is there. And while certainly some people don't appreciate or like or understand the art that is there, they still benefit from it, because in order to have something that is living as a culture, you have to have people making things. And so Marfa, in a strange way now, is an example of by a natural process, the people who are making things grow the entire town or city. And Marfa is nice because it was designed in the 1860s, and so it was designed for people. It was pre-cars. And right now I live in Los Angeles, so I can very clearly say that cities designed for cars do not work. That it's a different aesthetic, it's a different momentum, and okay, I might be really old-fashioned, but I like old cities because they're designed for people. And I think that actually has a big effect on the way people do their everyday life and the way they interact and the way information is exchanged is all affected by these things. So however it happens, I think the important thing is that the energy of people making things is shared, because that's when things happen.
How the city look like, like I think when we usually look to the cities, like for the first and second floor, the city has identity. Then after the third floor, everything is the same in the world. So this is very important. And I'm metaphoring this for the space. They said, I read once that more than 30 meters in the plaza or the street, then it's becoming too big, so people doesn't see each other. So it's something about content, order, and variety in the same time. The second thing is what we expect from architect in our time now. Did we expect, again, more high building or more? I think we expect from our architect today to fix between this building, to work in the space, to find the relation between the space. So I think this is big things, proposal for architect, urbanists to fix between these spaces. Yeah. I think this is the things that I want to open.
Thank you. I think, maybe as a kind of obvious comments, public art does speak to the community in a way that they would have been at the center point of ancient communities. Or Dr. Farah, in your introduction, you talked about kind of classical sculptures of antiquity, and even in the sculptures that you find in Trafalgar Square or in New York, they're put in plazas and public spaces deliberately to engage with the public. I think that therefore public art has an important role in bringing art to a wider audience than might otherwise find it in an art gallery. And Ahmed spoke about in Asir the gut paintings, which are these amazing murals, the kind of geometric designs of mysterious origins, and they're inside people's houses, and so very hard to see. But Ahmed and other artists from that region have started to bring their art to a wider audience as a way of bridging between what is otherwise a very private form of artistic expression, and somehow to bring that to the community at large. So I think public art does have a very important role to play in communicating artistic ideas to the widest community possible.
My next question would be, when you have initiatives like for instance now the Saudi art, the Public Art Commission, where there's an active or proactive sort of commissioning of public art for the city. I guess in each of your different sort of views or opinions, what should or is, I guess, the purpose of these kinds of public art commissions? Is it more about celebrating the artists and giving and bringing their work to the public in these open spaces, but also, with the focus being on the, giving a platform to the artist? Or is it more about sort of promoting the state or the nation in terms of, having these masterpieces that are part of, and the role that plays in validating certain aspects of state building, or about enhancing public interactions with the open spaces of their city and using public art as a way of attracting people, the public, to particular open spaces or city spaces, and using art as a way to sort of get the public to engage with the spaces of the city. I mean, they're quite, they're all related, I think, but they all, I mean, just, what are each of your views on, so what is then the role of these deliberate, particularly public art commissions, whether in the Gulf or elsewhere? I don't know, again, it doesn't have to go in order, whoever wants to discuss or address it.
I think the answer is it depends.
Yeah.
I think if you're smart about these things, it's very, very, very context related. So one thing that works one place is not going to work somewhere else. So certainly public art is very sensitive to its environment, and if you put something in the wrong place, it's not going to work. It's going to, so I don't think there's one big answer. I think the answer is to pay attention, and they're all problems, and they have to be solved in very specific ways. And so it's just about paying attention. So
yes, and I think it's also related to the creativity of the artist, the architect, the team that's work on this. It's an open question, open research usually, and usually new things coming to the idea of the commission, working with the city, monument or whatever. So yeah, there is mainly no answer. There is usually another question following another question.
Its own sculpture commission, and the medium of the first Art Jamil Commission for Sculpture is light. And again, looking at sort of the very broad sweep of artistic expression in Arabia as a whole, we've gone from petroglyphs and iron oxide paintings through to what we see in Jeddah as kind of conventional, albeit modern, sculpture forms in bronze and steel, etc., and stone. And now thinking about what we can do with technology moving so quickly, in some ways these public art commissions have a wonderful role to play in pushing artists towards the frontiers of what is achievable and what is possible. And I think that's another important role that public art commissions can play.
I think we'll go ahead and open up now to questions or comments from the audience. And I'll sacrifice my... Okay. Yeah. And I think if you can just, try and keep your comments or questions brief so we can get as many in as possible. But then also if there's a particular person that you're addressing your question to, obviously you can mention and maybe briefly introduce yourself at the beginning.
Hi, Maha Al-Sinan from Saudi Arabia. I would love to ask many questions, but I'll try to ask one for now at least. So George, regarding Art Jamil, I mean, I loved your presentation and talking about rock art as the first kind of public art. I would love if you brought better examples in Arabia. Of course, Jubba and Abar Hima in Arabia are much more richer than Lahyan, with all those large-scale figurines of women and warriors and bulls, and so not only language. Regarding the public art in Jeddah, of course, Art Jamil did a great job with the restoration. But how about the audience? Are they only people who come and have a picnic? How about the appreciation of the artwork? Is there any study? Thank you very much. Is there any indicators about the appreciation of the people of Jeddah or visitors to the public art there? And I mean, since the 70s, the huge public art project was the one in Jeddah, and it was ahead of its time at that time. But it's been, what, 50 years now? Is there anything else going on? Is Art Jamil thinking of something in a different project, maybe in the capital? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, just on the rock carvings, the palm tree I showed is actually from Be'er Hema, so I had that one in. But on the sculpture museum, there are well, a couple of questions. One that to your point about audience, I think it remains extremely, it's very busy. And I go there in the evenings relatively frequently, and it's heaving. And people consider it to be a great landmark and a great cultural destination in the city. As Al-Jamil, we organize school trips to engage young children in the monuments. Artists regularly visit it. Ahmed can probably speak also about how the artistic community of the city engages with the site. And as to the future, yes, I mean, Al-Jamil is indeed planning a number of projects. In sculptural terms, I already mentioned the Al-Jamil Commission, although that's in Dubai. But although open to all GCC applicants. And in Jeddah, yes, we are working on a number of projects which will be announced in due course. And I hope to share some more information then. Ahmed.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Maha Sinan, for your question. I think it's very important question because I know from before restoration in Jeddah, it was dying. Even information, people doesn't know about who is this, who's that, why, when it's come. And I think one of the rule also educational rule about public space, and also maybe the idea of the rock from Juba. Maybe it could be inspiration for a new era and future, for a new kind of sculpture. That's open. That's maybe answer for other question about how commission, what it look like. So also there is a big role in education and working on the community engagement still have been to done. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to add one other point, which was that actually, the museum was opened in 2013 as part of a program to restore and then relocate 20 of the sculptures, but we've continued to add to it. So I think last year, 2016, we opened a new sculpture on the same site by Maha Malouh, which called Food for Thought, which kind of expands and builds on the traditions of Al-Jamil and the Jeddah municipality
So one of the questions I'm asked all the time is how it felt to grow up half in New York and half in Texas, because they think it's an unimaginable gap. And to me, there's no contradiction at all, because people generally want the same thing no matter where they are. And there was a community in New York, there was a community in Marfa, and they're much more alike than they'll ever admit. And I think that holds true for almost everywhere else in the world. And the thing that struck me, and while there's a lot of differences within the cultures in different areas, the people generally want the same thing, and they have the same relationship to space, they have the same relationship to their own culture, and so that is always the same. So the structure is the same, it's the kind of flavorings that are different. So it's like a meal, right? You sit down at a meal and you have an opening and a drink and a main meal and a dessert. And while everywhere in the world the ingredients are different, the structure is pretty much the same. And when you sit down for a meal with somebody from halfway across the world, you know what you're doing, and everybody's in recognition that you're sharing something that is similar. And I think that is indicative of the other similarities that are shared all over the world. So.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the Great and the Merciful. I'd like to propose 3 challenges today. The first challenge is to myself. I would like to become a better person. I'd like a new start. And I'd like to give back to my country, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The second challenge is for every single individual in this room to A, breathe more, give thanks to God, B, breathe more, and C, submit everything you can imagine to MISC Foundation and MISC Art Institute, led by a great leader, Ahmed Maatar. I'd like a round of applause, please, if you don't mind, for Ahmed Maatar. It doesn't matter who I am. The third challenge is to Jamil Art to commission me. My name is Abdullah Qandil, the servant. The servant of God, and Qandil means light. So, back to point one, I will challenge myself. Thank you very much. Keep dreaming. Who would like the torch next, please? I'm going to pass the torch.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. And thank you to our three panelists for this very engaging discussion. And I'm sure there'll be opportunities throughout the day to continue, speaking amongst ourselves and with our panelists. So, and thank you all for coming this morning.